right. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Good morning. Hope you all are doing well. Welcome to Midnight Hatter Live, the weekly variety stream where we talk Gundam, Gunpla, and gaming. I'm, of course, your host, Steven, aka Midnight Hatter. And joining me today, in place of the illustrious Adam Blue, is I've got a special guest today, Ricky Hoskin, Hoskin House. How are you doing, my friend?
Good, good. Hello, everybody. Wonderful, beautiful Wednesday morning here in Central Virginia, and happy to be here.
Yeah, yeah. This is long overdue because you and I had originally met back in July when this was the first time I'd ever entered any kind of competition. It's actually the first time I've ever been involved with any sort of local community event around scale model building at all. So for me, it was like I've been making this joke with my wife. It was like that Fallout TV show where everybody out here is like these hardened scale modelers, and I'm sitting here like okie dokie. The vault dweller in my basement. Um, but you guys were all so welcoming to me and kind of brought me into the fold. So and I think that it's great that sort of serendipitously, the next time that we were available to link up was today, which is just following the Gundam Base mobile tours visit to our beloved hometown here in Virginia.
Yeah, yeah,
Now
and
that oh, go ahead.
I would say to harken back to the Hobbytown show with with you coming out of the vault. I think everybody that's been to a show to compete or to exhibit something of theirs has a similar experience for that first time where you're like, oh, I've been kind of isolated doing this to myself, and then you get out there and you're like, whoa, it's wild. And I think everybody, or at least hopefully, has a positive experience when they go out. And hopefully, I should say, I don't think everybody does, but hopefully everybody has a positive experience to reinforce that. That's a big part of the hobby is getting out and like showcasing and networking and seeing what it's all about in person.
Absolutely. And as me personally, I've always been sort of a vocal critic of online communities, not necessarily because I don't like interacting with people, but typically a lot of the sort of toxicity and rejection that you feel, it typically comes from online communities. I've never once, and this again just my personal experience, and you can share yours, is being out in person and interacting with people like on the ground at these types of events. I've never once encountered like any kind of people smack talking about each other's models and things like that. I mean, I think it's a lot harder to be mean to people's face than it is, through a keyboard, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's easy to hide behind your avatar or your screen name and just put stuff out there in the universe and not really be held accountable. But
Yeah,
face to face is a very different thing in person. Like there is accountability because you're right there. And I think too, like if you have the motivation and the interest in getting out and doing something publicly and in person, then you automatically get merit because you're trying. It takes a lot more energy to go to a show, to go to an event and participate than it does to just put a picture on the internet and then just smash talk people. Like, what I
100%.
mean? It's a bigger personal investment to do that in person.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I encourage everyone to share their work, whether they're proud of it or not, because what you'll find is it typically in our spaces, in like hobby and craft spaces, um, people are very generous with their with their tips and tricks and things like that. It's amazing for people like us that are typically introverts, because obviously we kind of bury ourselves in our hobbies. Everyone is really just, once you get people talking about their interests, like any kind of animosity is out the window. It's like, oh yeah, you want to know how I painted this? Like, oh, you've never done this kind of decal work. Like it's amazing the transformation you'll see from someone who's kind of stoic and quiet in the corner to they'll be a social butterfly once you get them talking about the things that they're interested in.
Exactly, exactly. It's and because where else are you going to talk about this thing? You know, you can talk about your coworkers or with your wife or your kids, and they're only going to listen so much because it's not a common interest. So they're just like, okay, okay, yeah, got it. That's enough. Let's talk about something else. But when you get around those people at a show or an event, you're like, you can't get enough, and everybody's excited to be talking about it. You know?
Yeah, I mean, one of the greatest experiences at the Hobbytown show that we met at was, that, airplane modeler that was asking you, like, "Hey, what's the
Oh
deal with
yeah,
Gundam in general?" You know? And that was
yeah,
fantastic because it's like you kind of see that bridging of the gap where it's like, "Hey, we're both interested in this shared space of scale modeling, but, I see that you're doing something slightly different from what I'm doing, and what can we learn from each other?" And so, it's such a cool space to interact with people, so
yeah. It really is. And I have a, you know, I think we talked about it at Hobbytown, but ODO, which is one of the biggest IPMS shows on the East Coast, is here in Richmond every February. And me going to that for a few years really opened my eyes to other types of models and vice versa. Like I always had people who built other types of models come and hang around the Gundam tables, and it creates this whole atmosphere of like there is so much to learn and there's so much out there, and really there's it's whatever you want to take from it. Like it's
yeah,
endless. So however much you want to like put into or take out of it, it's there. So if you just want to go and just put a Gundam on the table and just talk to Gundam people, you can do that. You want to go and talk to airplane modelers and tank modelers and car modelers and sci-fi and scratch builders, it's all there, and they're
yeah,
all eager to talk about it. And there's plenty of people coming over to the Gundam areas who know nothing about Gundam. I've had conversations with, just like the airplane guy at Hobbytown, that want to know, like, what is this? What's the significance? How do you go about doing this compared to a normal model? They
yeah.
because they don't know.
No, and that's one of the beautiful things is the what we can learn from each other through that, and, and I don't think that you won't get that kind of experience online at all. Like it's got to
No,
be something like an event like either the Hobbytown event or you mentioned ODO and I'm glad that you brought up IPMS because you are a card carrying member. Um and
that's right.
so that's something that a lot of mutual builders that I'm friends with have been interested in is like getting outside of the Gundam comfort zone and getting into like there's this whole world of, military and other mechanical scale modeling, whether it's automotive or, there's so many things and there's a rich history behind it that,
Mhm.
that started in England, I guess, was yeah, let me let's rewind a bit and we can start there is like so for people who are watching here, they're mostly Gunpla fans who aren't familiar with IPMS, can you give us an overview of what that is and how you became a member, how you got introduced to it in the first place?
Well, IPMS is pretty much your main and oldest plastic modeling group with actual like structure, and it stands for the International Plastic Model Society, and it's international. So it's the main body of scale modelers who have come together around the world to say, okay, we all have the same hobby. How can we set this up and make a structure so like this what pretty much justifies what's in the hobby, what isn't. What if we want to have competitions? Like, how do we go about it? What are the guidelines for judging a model? All these different things. There's like any other hobby or really club that say take for instance gymnastics. Like my older kids did gymnastics for a while, and so you go to competitions and there's all of these like governing bodies and there's different levels to it. So IPMS is kind of like that. Like you have a local chapter that you join. Some of them have dues, some of them don't. But you become a member of the International Society for a set fee. It's an annual fee. It's very low cost. You get a magazine subscription with it, and you get discounted entry into all kinds of events. They host tons of shows, regional and local shows around the United States and around the world every single year. Then they have really major international competitions. They have a U.S. nationals competition. Then they have one in England, and there's one in Hungary, Europe, which are two of the biggest in the entire world. And I'm
Wow.
talking about like for a week long. Like modelers come from all over the world, and you will see the best models you have ever seen in your life at some of these events, including the U.S. Nationals, which are here in Virginia next year. So that's going to be exciting. But
That is
IPMS,
awesome.
it's just a place like for you to go. Like I go actually Monday night. This past Monday night was our local meeting. We go once a month, and they've been very welcoming to the Gundam community because for years Gundam was not part of IPMS. You had sci-fi, and sci-fi was almost even like the stepchild of IPMS because IPMS was founded, mainly by people that did very traditional modeling, which is primarily military.
Yep,
Your armor, which is going to be your tanks and your heavy artillery, that sort of thing, and aircraft, which is, a huge thing still. Aircraft is a huge part of modeling. And
for
then you also
sure.
have automotive. So you have people that are building cars, trucks, vans, construction vehicles, fire trucks, all of the commercial vehicles, and then dioramas and sci-fi. So those are your traditional like IPMS. But it's really opened up to Gundam because Gundam is also an international hobby. It's very big in the East. It's really gained momentum in the West, particularly over the last decade, and
Oh, yeah.
even over the last 5 years, has really accelerated quickly. So ODO, which is an IPMS hit event here in Richmond, and you hear me talk about, you'll hear a lot of chatter about it, particularly on Instagram. It's become a main hub for Gundam and Gunpla on the East Coast because they've been welcoming, and it's a huge event. It's grown by leaps and bounds over the past 4 or 5 years, and Gundam is a big part of it. So they've been welcoming because they see that it's drawing people in. People are interested in it. It's another avenue of unexplored uh, parts of the hobby that haven't been there. So you have an aging kind of demographic in IPMS that, you know, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, post World War II, post Vietnam, these guys that they're building models of things that they saw in movies, on TV, and
Yeah,
comic books that, like war, military, like those early types of like heroes, as it were soldiers. Like, you think of World War II soldiers and all that stuff, and plastic army men, and
yeah,
it's also historical. There's historical value there. You're creating and reproducing things that were real and were part of American history and world history. But now it's grown into like the sci-fi and like Gundam factor is like, oh well, here's a whole nother artistic aspect that has no basis in reality. It's
right.
100% based in like fan fiction. It's Eastern art. It's like all of these cultural things that have nothing to do with reality, but are just as valid to the modeling world at large. And I think that if people were to want to become involved more in modeling outside of Gundam and Gunpla, IPMS is the perfect place because IPMS, not all of IPMS chapters are open to Gundam. Some of them are still, it's slow. It's a slow opening. But I think the more people are open to joining IPMS and embracing some of those traditional models, there's give and take. So I think by saying, "Hey, we respect what you've done for all these decades, and we
Yeah,
respect that you've set up the system, you've set up how to run a contest, you set up how to judge it, and so we don't want to create waves. We want to come in and be part of that.
exactly.
I think that's what's working. And they're
It's
very
about paying
receptive to that.
dues, not just, like, financial dues, but paying your dues as in, like, just respect to the community that's existed for so long,
Yeah,
right?
and most of those people are very open and very generous, and they have a wealth of knowledge when it comes to modeling.
They
A lot of
really
people
do.
have never, in our little community, a lot of people have never built a model that isn't a snap kit or a Gundam. And there's a lot of things to learn. Just from like removing seam lines. All these small little things that like could improve your modeling skills if that's what you want. Like now, some people just want to snap build a Gundam and pose it and put it on the shelf. That's fine. But
Yeah,
I'm talking about if you want to explore modeling per se as a hobby, like I want to paint, I want to weather, I want to build a diorama to put it in. Like there's a wealth of information available in IPMS to help you on that journey.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, for them, with it being sort of an older organization with a sort of an aging demographic, it is a doorway to, you know, younger crowds to get them into, you know, traditional modeling so that, you know, because I know plenty of especially younger modelers who, you know, they'll put together their high grades or real grade Gunpla, and they're sitting there telling me like, "Oh, that was easy." Like, you know, I'm bored with the snap builds. It's like they want the
Right.
challenge, but, you know, they're just not getting it from Gunpla, and so, you know, that's where it's like, okay, you know, kind of if you expose yourself to other types of scale modeling, that gives you the opportunity to branch out and do things a little differently.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something to be said about, um, you know, you mentioned how a lot of these traditional models are based in reality and based on actual machinery, whether it's automotive, whether it's military, or aircraft. And so what's interesting is that a lot of Gunpla, you know, the mechanical design of it is very interpretive because you know we don't know what an actual mobile suit would look like in the internals. Like it's all just kind of
Right.
science fiction make believe, like you know. But you know, at scale, these models, like especially in the automotive, it's like you know an automotive engine at scale has to look exactly like the real thing, and so at a
Yeah.
certain level, it has to be sort of functional, right?
Yep. Yep.
Which can be an awesome, it's just an awesome exposure to that sort of engineering that typically Gunpla enthusiasts and Gundam enthusiasts don't get to see what actual engineering looks like. It's more like fantasy
Yeah.
engineering, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because in my mind, if you think about going back, that we're at the 45th anniversary of Gundam and all that, it's Tomino created Gundam as to be a real robot style, right? So you have like your super robot and all that, which is awesome. But
Yeah,
like Gundam at its heart is supposed to be real robot. So it's supposed to be kind of grounded in what could be possible, right? So these machines are designed to be something that we don't necessarily know how they work. And, obviously Minovsky particles and all that stuff are all kind of made up. But nonetheless, they are designed to be like machines and function like machines that are subject to gravity and subject to, space and like, all those things that the environments they're in. So
exactly.
by embracing some of this real world stuff, there's a lot of overlap. Like if you want to do a lot of scribing and a lot of like modifications and scratch building on a Gundam to make it more realistic, you know, it, lots of
Yeah,
people have said it before. Look around, like there's all the inspiration is around you, and if you go to IPMS, how do you translate that into a scale model? And there you go. That's what you're
exactly.
saying.
No, yeah, well said. So now this past weekend, again, well, okay, so before we get into Gundam Base and your thoughts on that, tell me about your introduction to scale modeling, because you know you and I had a conversation at Hobbytown where it was like, you know, you had entered into what was six total competitions. Was you know you were in the Gunpla category, armored, aircraft, and yeah, what walk me through kind of what got you into scale modeling, how you've branched out since, you started, and, you know, what brings you the most passion now?
Okay. So like a lot of people, I started building models as a kid. And at the time, it was mostly what was available in a store. So,
Yeah.
everybody had that like you're a kid and you get a car model or like an airplane model and you get like a tube of glue and you put it together and you get some paints like and it looks horrible. So, I
That's
had
like a
that
rite of
whole run.
passage.
I was right. And I always loved building stuff when I was a kid and like even like wooden models, like the wooden airplanes and all of those things. Well, like everybody else, you kind of grew up, you go through your teenage years and your young adult years, and you're interested in other things, right? And so, like a lot of people, coincidentally, I had in the late 90s come across Gundam and, or Gunpla, I should say. And it was in an obscure way because of the music I was listening to at the time. It was a lot of like scratch DJ, hip hop sort of stuff. And a lot of the competitions for those scratch DJs in the late 90s and early 2000s were held in Japan. So, watching like VHS tapes of like these scratch DJ competitions,
Yeah.
held in Japan, and a lot of them had like, you know, basically bonus footage of them just hanging out in Japan, and they were going to hobby stores and like buying Gundams, and I was like, "What is that?" And so that was like my first introduction to Gundam was not Toonami. It was like the actual models from watching like scratch DJ competitions going on in
I mean,
Japan, and
that's
I was like,
fascinating. Like,
really
I can't
right.
think of a more unique, entry into the world of Gunpla than through scratch DJing, and then especially Eastern artists like that, like
Yeah, it was so I really had to, at that point, seek out what it was, and I was like, "What is this?" Internet was pretty, still young, still in its
Yep,
infancy, so, like, search engines and trying to find out, and finally, like, I came across some, they were and luckily at the time was also when, Gundam Wing was airing on Toonami and all of that, so Gundam models were available, so became a kind of serendipitous moment of, like, I came across it from a completely different path, like not Toonami, not Gundam Wing. It was more from the models and harking back to like loving to like build and tinker around with little things. I got a few. It was, I just put them together. I didn't paint them
yeah,
or anything. I was like, oh, this is cool. Put them up. They're just part of my, decorations and whatever my apartment, whatever at the time. Well, fast forward to 2019, I was on vacation and my wife and I were strolling around a little main street town, and there was a hobby shop, and I was like, oh cool, I want to go in here. I'm like looking around, looking at all the models, and then they had a Gundam section, and it was really small, and I was like, oh my gosh. And so I was like looking for stuff that I recognized, and I saw at the time, this is 2019, so there none of the HG like Gundam Wing kits were out yet,
right,
other than some variants of Wing. Uh, but they had lots of HGUC kits, and I saw Double Zeta, and I was like, that was one I remembered. So I picked up a Double Zeta HG, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And immediately it clicked, and I was like, the technology and the model kits had advanced so far in that like
oh
20
yeah,
years that I was blown away. So, I got a few more kits, and then the pandemic happened. And so, model kits, nothing else to do. Like a lot of people, it was just the pace picked up, and I really started. That's when I was like, oh, maybe I'll try painting, and I'll try, different things. That's when all that started. So, I really
so
started diving in at probably summer of 2020, painting. So it started with Tamiya rattle cans and like that sort of thing. And I was like, okay. It didn't take long. I was like airbrush, and it's no looking back ever
th
since.
this is
And
so
in the past few
fascinating.
years,
Well,
in the
'cause
past few
oh yeah, go ahead.
years, I was to say to transition to the other models,
Oh yeah,
it going to IPMS shows, like ODO and stuff, and really like listening to some other like because I was just hungry and thirsty for content. I started watching YouTube channels about modeling. Well, there wasn't many Gundam ones, but there was plenty on other types of models.
oh
There were
yeah,
some podcasts on some other types of models. I was finding IPMS groups talking about other models. So I was just like, okay, well, maybe I can get into that, listen, learn, and put that into my Gunpla. So that's what I started doing. Well, you take in so much information from that. At a certain point, it just became enticing to like, why don't I just try and build one of those other models? So I just was like, okay, I want to try and build like pretty much every other type of model there is, see what I can learn from it. And I just found enjoyment in it. Like building planes has its own unique challenges, and it's fun. Like building a tank is fun, building a truck is fun, like building a sci-fi model is fun, doing painting a figure by hand is fun. Like so
yeah.
just putting all these
When
pieces, but they
when you showed
all
me
like
the rigging on that plane, and it's like I mean, the rigging on that plane was practically invisible unless you,
yeah.
like, got real up close, so I'm still fascinated by how you were able to do that.
And I was too, like, when I saw that for the first time at ODO, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, they actually have, like they look like spider webs, like, on these things," and they're scale, like, that's the old-fashioned that they're radio antenna, that's what they are. It's like before, like, modern radio like, radio was still pretty much a new thing, two-way radio in an aircraft, so they had, like, triangular configurations of wires, and that was their giant, like, net to grab a radio signal. and fascinated by that sort of thing because I
Yeah.
love weird machines, like, and I love to see how things like go together. So seeing all that and all of my mind works together for like different types of models coming together. Like, so my first love will always be Gundam. It's always going to be Gunpla, but I love building other stuff and kind of overlapping those styles and techniques into. I like putting my Gundam techniques into car models. I like putting my Gundam techniques into tanks and vice versa. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, it's amazing. It's not just, like you said, it's not just take, it is a give and take. Like, there are things that, Gundam modeling can offer to, traditional scale modeling, but then, like, it's easy to see the benefit of embracing scale modeling as a Gunpla, as a Gunpla enthusiast. But, I mean, I hope that anyone listening right now is taking so much inspiration because the fact that, like, as far as being serious about the customization and the painting, the fact that you've been able to, accelerate your growth and talent in just 5 years to the level that you're at now is is remarkable and insane, like, and that's why I'm like, "Oh, man, this is fascinating," because so many people are so intimidated by it, and, especially, like, someone like me who it's like I've been building Gunpla for, like, 13 years, and I'm still only just kind of scratching the surface about, getting into more heavy customization and painting and stuff like that, and so, it w w everyone that I've talked to recently, it's been like, okay, I got into it either just before the pandemic or I really got serious, like, during the pandemic, and just
Right.
the amount of growth and the amount that you can learn in such a short period of time is so impressive, and that's what I really hope that people are taking away from this is it's like, not to be intimidated by some of these things and not to be especially when you see someone who puts out quality work like you do, not to be intimidated by it, but it's like, wow, that's something that's attainable.
Oh yeah, and it's so weird when people tell me things like, "Oh, it's intimidating." 'Cause I'm like, but I don't feel any different, because for me it's still the journey. Like I'm still on the journey too, and then and
Absolutely.
I can look back and see progress, and but for me it's such a slow burn of like the 4 years that it took me from picking up an airbrush the first time to what I am now. I just continually try and learn stuff, and at a certain point, I look. The only way I can really tell sometimes that wow things have changed is if I look at something 3 years ago versus something 3 months ago. But, like, if you look back to back, it's so gradual, and I tell
Right.
that to people, I'm like, just try and each build, try something different, but don't go crazy, like, just try a little something different. Or you tried a new technique on your last build, see if you can just do that a little bit better on your next one, like, it's just continually, like, honing in what you're learning, like, don't just try something and be like, "Oh, that was pretty good, and let me try something else," like, just keep working on that thing, and when you feel pretty confident, add something to it, just keep adding a little bit at a
Yeah.
time. And it's also fun. Like if you're not having fun, then you're doing something wrong. Like
Yeah.
then why what's the point of doing it? Like find what you enjoy doing and work on that. Like focus on it. Like you don't like scribing, you don't enjoy it. Fine, then don't scribe. Like find something you enjoy and just push everything you got into it. And I
Yeah.
guarantee you're gonna get results and be like, whoa, That's how you kind of find style too. Like people are like, oh, I can always tell your models on the table, blah blah. I'm like because it took me a long time to figure out what I liked.
Yeah,
So
to
it's
hone in
only
on
my
that.
style. Yeah, it's only my style because it's what I like. It's what I want to see on my shelf in my hobby room, which 99% of the time I'm the one looking at this stuff enough. Yeah, there's a picture of it on my Instagram. I might take it to a show, but I'm the one who's really looking at it day in and day out. So it's like if it makes me happy, that's what's important. So I find what I really like and it a lot of my painting techniques and styles have come from models outside of Gunpla, and that's that whole give and take. Like I learned so much from like armor modelers and aircraft modelers because they've been doing techniques for decades, to get realistic looks. And I'm like, how do they do that? So it's asking questions, and there are modelers out there that are national award winners that I talk to, and I'm just like, "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you. Can I ask you some questions?" And 9 times out of 10, they're like, "Oh, absolutely." Like, that whole intimidation factor, like, we're just people, and 9
Yeah,
times I screw up stuff just like anybody else, you know? The key to a good modeler sometimes is just knowing how to fix something, and so I've had so many expert modelers tell me that, like, the key is just knowing how and when to fix something. Like, don't be afraid to mess it up.
yeah.
Just know how to fix it. That's what you want. That's the skill that's the most valuable.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and embracing those mistakes because sometimes that's where some of the most creative stuff comes from
Yeah,
when something doesn't turn out exactly how you planned it, but having the sort of agility to pivot around it and be like, okay, well, let's make the most of what we've got here.
yeah,
But and it goes back to, kind of what I was saying where it's like, documenting your progress, whether it's something you are proud of at the moment or not, taking photos and sharing them and things like that. I think that's important because like you said, you might not see the growth right away, but when you have the ability to look at it side by side and say like, wow, that really is something that I did 3 years ago, and you can
yeah,
tell the
yeah.
difference, then oh man, and what's interesting is that other people will call that out before you can see it, I think in my experience, people have been like, "Wow, you've come so far in this many months," versus, you might not see it at first. So it's helpful to have that kind of a
Well, that is
community and
so true,
yeah, I mean,
so
especially like
true.
you said, people have come to recognize you for your particular style and the type of finish that you apply. And so for people to be able to see the work that you've put out and say like, okay, I see what you've done differently from this piece to your last one. It can be it can be revealing for sure.
Yeah. I think a good a good litmus test is, and this is always gets me, is my wife and I, share a Google account. So all of my photos, get saved and backed up to Google Photos. So since we share that account, she'll always get stuff, pop up, and she'll make a comment. She's like, "Man, you know what? Your photography has gotten really good." Like, from seeing that over the years, she's just like, "Oh, it's crazy. A photo will pop up from 3 years ago," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's kind of." She's like, I can't believe you took that picture." She's like, "Your photography has gotten pretty good." And I'm like, it's funny because it's not something I think about. Like, I'm just taking a picture of a model. I'm not really, but it has, because I've suddenly like got my light, just tweaked my lighting to be exactly where I want to highlight the paint. I've got to get lighting from this angle with, the aperture and, shutter speed. Like, all these things are like dialed in, but a little bit at a time. It took like years to figure out the lighting because everybody's models are different, and
Yeah.
your lighting and your photography you have to be custom too, like to fit your model. And it took me a long time to figure that out.
Absolutely. I mean, even just a couple weeks ago when I was talking to our mutual friend Gunpla, just
Oh
learning
yeah.
his lighting tricks around like, oh, well,
Mhm.
I just have, he's like, I shoot in a dark room and I overexpose and move the light around in order to create this ambient light and reduce the amount of like, harsh light on any one surface. That's not
Yep.
something that you would like, if you were to talk to a photographer, that's not something that they would necessarily recommend. That's something that, like,
No.
only people in our sort of shared hobby space are going to think, like, "I know that this isn't the way you're supposed to do it, but this is how I've done it, and this is how I get the effect that I'm looking for," and it's like, there's no, like, database where that knowledge is stored, right? It's
It's not.
all
It's not. It's
yeah.
trial and error, and knowing, like, trusting your instinct about what looks good. And for me, it's like, it's the photography part of it. It becomes another layer of dynamic. So, I'm creating life in the model by the way I take a picture of it. So it's not just like, boom, here's the static thing on a tabletop. It's like it
Mhm.
creates drama, it creates motion or lack of motion, or all these things are, they really kind of breathe a little life. Like, I've had coworkers that look at my Instagram and they're like, "Oh, that's a model. I thought it was just like an AI image." And I'm like, no, it's actually a model with,
Like, I'm
you
offended you
know,
even
with
asked.
yeah. I was like, but they know, but they're like,
No,
I didn't
yeah,
know that was a model. And I'm like, I think sometimes I wonder if people come across, my account or like Mean Mug or somebody, and like it doesn't register to them that that's what it is because everything is so like my process is down to like same thing with Mean Mug is like my lighting and
like
my
you said, it's
backdrop
dialed
and
in.
this, yeah, and like I'm gonna recreate that for pretty much every photo now because it's what works for my painting style and how I want that model to look, in a photograph. And because it's just adding that last layer of presentation to the model of like this, for whatever reason it fits, it's what I like, and this is how I'm presenting it.
Well, yeah, like, on that note, let me go ahead and share, your Instagram account here on the stream so that we can actually look at some of these, pieces. I feel bad, it's like, we're talking about photography and breathing life into these amazing works, and we're not even, like, showing them off, so it feels like we're hiding something. But, so, like, and this is one that you posted recently that I was a huge fan of, which was, the food truck, right? Like, this
Yeah, yeah, the
which again
fishmonger.
yeah, yeah. So, um, now this was how many, automotive, kits have you done prior to this particular one?
Prior to this one, I did a motorcycle and I did a truck for my dad for Father's Day a few years ago. That truck was like the first, he bought the kit and was like, "Could you build this for me?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it for Father's Day." And that was my first
Nice,
one. This was my first real attempt at like doing something that, the way I wanted to do it.
nice.
So pretty much one. The answer would be one true vehicle before this one.
So, and this is fantastic, and this is what I try to tell people a lot of times too, is that, we typically associate dioramas with storytelling, right? But I think that what you've kind of shown me and, what I've learned just observing the kind of work that especially when you post these sort of dynamic photographs and things like that, is that it is possible to create narrative even just in the model itself without having any kind of extraneous, um, like any of the sort of distraction of a background and like, um, what am I looking for? The environment can almost distract you from the story that you're telling with just the
Yes,
piece. And so that's where
yes.
I'm like, I'm looking at this and it's like, you can see where the wear and tear on this vehicle has been, and I love the way that let me go back to that last photo because I love the way that the tires are just slightly angled, where it's almost like you could see where where this van was parked, right?
Yeah,
Um
that's exactly it. Yeah. It pulled into the spot. That wasn't set there like your hand didn't lay it down. Like it drove into the spot. And
exactly. So yeah, tell me a little bit about that process, about this piece in particular, and the photographing that you did to create this look that's, I mean, like you said, when I look at this, I can see why people would say it's AI generated, but to me, it looks like a real vehicle, like just pulled into basically a trade show.
Mhm. Well, it all starts with the. I appreciate that too. It all starts with the painting of very subtle highlights. So I usually try and like a prime. And then with each of my colors, I try and build it up the way that natural light would appear on objects. So it's almost like animated from the start. So
Okay.
the same you would have an animation cell, or you would have like a manga, or anything where it's an illustration that was full color. The artist is going to render it with like highlights and shadows. I try and do that. So when I start out with the model, I'm like, what pose is it going to be in? And for this case, it's a vehicle, so it's just going to be sitting there. So how do I portray that this vehicle has like been through the rain? It's driven down the road. It's he's had to load like fish and ice and like ingredients in the back of this truck a million times, and all those different things, even down to the fish. Like the fish has got to be it's it's metallic, but it's also a little bit worn because it's been through wind, it's been through rain, and
Yeah.
all those things. So my approach is like in the painting from the ground up is like, okay, it starts with my paint work and it ends with the weathering. Like, okay, so around this opening, it's going to be a little bit more worn because people are leaning against it or stuff's getting loaded in and out of it. Like it's that natural train of thought of like, how is this really done in the real world? Like it's not random, down to the tires are, they're dusty. Like they're not completely like blown out and muddy. They're
Yeah,
dusty. And there's some like a little bit of oil and grease on the tires. Like if you look at your own wheels on your car, like the lug nuts are a little bit rusty, a little bit oily. They're not filthy, but that's where a little bit of grease
that's
is
where
going
it
to build up
collects.
naturally. Yep,
Yeah,
your tire tread's gonna have dust on them after you drive down the road or up a gravel road, or driveway. That's the way it is. And so I'm looking at my own car out front, going, okay, well, when I pull in the driveway, I may or may not have the tires straight. Usually I do, but like I see cars parked all the time, and the tires are crooked because they pull in. They don't take the time to like straighten the wheel before they turn off the ignition, get out. They just are at that position.
I
And
know. If I were
particularly, I
modeling
work
this
in
after my car, I'd scrape up the rims a little bit because I always pull up against the curb.
hit the curb, yeah. I'll say I work in the city, so I see a lot of parallel parking, and the tires are always cockeyed. So I'm like, it's just natural in my mind that a vehicle parks, its wheels are turned. Also, an old trick that from knowing cars a little bit is that when you have a commercial vehicle, an old trick is to turn the tires or turn the wheel so that if the vehicle were to roll, like, because I've been driving a manual transmission like my entire life. Like I grew up driving a stick. And so if you parallel park on a hill, it's always like turn the
Yeah,
tire so if your brake gives out, it hits the curb and stops versus like,
exactly. People
so it's
trust their
just that.
parking brake too much.
Yeah, exactly. So it's always in my mind, like living in towns on hills and things where you're parking, you turn the wheel so that if the parking brake were to give out, your vehicle rolls into something and stops very, very close to where it's parked. But anyway, that's maybe too much information.
No,
But
no, see, this is
on
exactly
the
what,
inside of
kind of.
that thing,
Oh, yeah?
you can't really see it, unfortunately, photographs. But I took the time to. There's an entire like hibachi grill inside the back of it. And so I painstakingly like painted like with different colored ingredients. There's like a leather cushion seat that the cook or the driver would sit on. And so I've worn. I wish I'd taken more pictures of that before I put it in, but the cushion is like worn right in the middle where they would
R
sit. It's not.
Yeah,
It's a little bit on the edges, but it's naturally like just worn more from that
center
person
cushion.
sitting right in the middle of that cushion. Yeah.
And so
So
these
it's
are
just that
things.
thought process.
Yeah, absolutely. And so these are things that, maybe do you necessarily plan this all out ahead of time, or is it more of like an iterative, like as you go, hey, maybe I'm going to apply this here, and or do you kind of have it mapped out from the start?
I very rarely have a full picture in my head before I start. I'll have a general plan, but when it comes to like those types of details, it's very intuitive. So I'm doing it as I'm thinking. So while I'm holding it and doing the process, that's when those thoughts. Because I'm doing it right then. So it's like now is like when my mind starts going, okay, I'm weathering it now. Where would this be weathered and how? So as I'm doing the weathering, I'm thinking about. It. I'm not just putting stuff on there, like, maybe I'm stepping back for a minute and just looking at it. Maybe I'm like, "Okay, you know what? I'm gonna give this a day to think about and come back to it." And it's very much a, part of the process while I'm doing it, for me. I know a lot of people are like, very gotta have everything planned out to a T, and that's
No.
fine. It's just a different creative process.
Yeah, for sure, I've seen that, like, different people have their own kind of creative energy that they bring to the table where it's like, some people like to have that thing, kind of dialed in before they start, but in my experience, most of the people that I've talked to are very, you know, they just kind of like you said, it's almost instinctual because they are avid observers of their environment, and I think that, you kind of hit the nail on the head when it comes to, like, that creative process of taking inspiration from things like animation, and, so that makes me, I'm curious, like, do you have any, background in art, like, illustrative art, like drawing, painting, things like that, as well?
Not at all. Not
So
at all.
Well, see that, and that, so that's interesting to me because, I know some builders that do and some builders that don't, but at the end of the day, they
Yeah.
all arrive at the same sort of, uh, process when it comes to their painting, right? Like you said, laying down flats and then gradually building up shadows and highlights. So it's interesting how that's almost like a universal truth of art, right? Is building
Yeah,
those gradients.
exactly.
So
Now, I've
and it
always
doesn't.
been like you said, always been an avid observer, like in environments, and but I've also always been a big fan of art. Just never been very good at drawing and stuff. But when I started modeling and started painting and started absorbing and like learning from other builders and really studying what they're doing, then I think I kind of found that artistic thing in modeling. You know what I mean? Like I've
Yeah,
always been creative and I've always like at certain points in my life like had a yearning to do something creative but didn't really know where to put that energy into. And I think that's why modeling really clicked with me because I think I've finally found a place to put that creative energy into. And I've tried lots of things that I've never been good at it. And then
no,
modeling just always felt at home like from day one.
I'm right there with you because, like, all through college and things like that is like I always wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a storyteller, and it wasn't until I found a medium that actually wasn't written word storytelling, but like narrative in
Yeah.
in scale modeling that I was like, "Oh, this is how I'm going to tell stories." It's not,
Hmm.
I'm not gonna write the next great American novel. This is where my stories are gonna be told, and so it's about finding that outlet, and so I think that's, again, it's a fascinating, journey that you've been on. Um, Now I know that we're coming up to the end of the hour, so I did wanna, highlight this piece because this is sort of the piece that we met over was your,
Oh
custom
yeah.
Luda Origin version, which won the, Hobbytown model competition for the Gunpla category. You actually won 3 categories and I think placed in 4 total, correct?
I placed in six.
Oh, yeah,
I
placed in
placed
all 6?
I took 6 and yeah, I placed remarkably enough, 6. I had 3 first place and 3 second place in
So
that
so
show.
this was the first place of the Gunpla category,
This was
which
a
I
first
thought
place.
was, yeah, which was fantastic. Tell me about this piece and kind of what inspired it. I mean, I love the paint job personally because it's high contrast, it pops. But yeah,
So for me, I wanted to do this was part of that group build, the Zig Xeon build, and I like Xeon suits, and I think they lend themselves to my painting style, even though I don't do a lot of them because they're not angular, right? So they're
yeah,
more organic, rounded shapes, which I really like. Uh, but for this one, the Zuda, I always thought it was like the coolest mobile suit, except for the legs. Like I was always like, man, this suit is really cool from the waist up, but the legs look so out of place, right? So
yeah,
in my mind, for some reason, I ended up getting a bunch of pre-snapped kits from somebody for free who's getting out of the hobby, and they had a Zaku one Origin, and I was like, man, I always thought in my mind, if I build a Zuda, I got to change the legs, and I was like,
yeah,
the Origin line would be the way to go. So I actually came across getting this bundle of pre-built kits weeks before I built this, and it's just the timing was perfect. And so I had to modify some of the waist and some of the hip joints to make it work. But all in all, aesthetically, I did very little because it just matched up, which I always do in my mind. Because if you look at the Zuda from the waist up, it's very much like an Origin looking design. You know what I
yeah,
mean? It's MS Igloo, but it really looks like it's almost like the granddaddy of Origin because it's that weird side story, like real early on kind of design. So it lends itself to
yeah,
that. I also really like Xeon suits in white, like the Shin Matsunaga Zugaka did. I really like, for whatever reason, that white, but I felt like this one, it couldn't be all white. It had to
yeah,
have a little bit of like that Xeon uber military kind of pattern to it too. So I decided to go white and then break it up with like a greenish, really a brownish green, and then the gray to kind of offset that with some metallics around it to kind of give it because it would have been a test type, right? So this one I felt like the kind of backstory would be it was a test type that got, really did well, and so, like, an ace pilot maybe or a sniper was given the suit, and so had it modified and upgraded with some really killer stuff on it to go out and, like, do some damage. So that's kind of the little package deal in my mind for it.
Yeah, I love it, and I love, like, the color blocking in particular, I'm with you, like, I love, Xeon suits, mostly because of that more organic looking design,
Mhm.
but, to me, a color palette like this where you kind of break it up as opposed to sort of the typical Zaku sort of monochrome, that's one of the reasons I love the Zaku 1 is because you have the blues to break up the solid green, right? And
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
think that having this, it almost looks like a military uniform, in that, in that sense where it's like, almost like pants and boots type look, so I
Yeah,
think that
yeah.
that's
Yeah, I love that
fantastic.
kind of thing.
Sweet. Well, hey, before we, close out for the hour, I did wanna get, your sort of thoughts because you attended, the Gundam Base mobile tour here on Friday. I was there Saturday and got horrifically sunburned, and so that's why I'm
Oh,
practicing,
so many people
sun care.
so many people had sunburn.
Yeah, Nick was I saw him, he was smart, he brought the sunscreen, I was like, "Ah, see, that's the benefit of being a veteran out at these events is you know that you're gonna
Mhm.
be, standing around a lot." But yeah, so what were your
Yeah.
thoughts about, I wanted to kind of interview you on the ground, but I know that, we were kind of, on different schedules that weekend, so what did you think of the event, and, what kind of impression did you take away from it?
I thought, well, it was a bit overwhelming because this hobby town didn't host it last year, and since it became a flagship store early this year, they had the opportunity. And
Mhm.
I think overall it was fantastic. Having so many people there is problematic only in that logistically they weren't prepared for it. So I think going forward, if they come back, hopefully they learn from this. And when I say they, I don't mean Hobbytown. Hobbytown was more than prepared. They were fantastic hosts of this event. I'm
Yeah,
speaking, Bandai Namco and that whole thing. I feel like logistically, this is still a fairly new thing for them as well. So you kind of learn as you go how to do something like this.
yeah,
But
you
man,
never
it
know what the
it was
turnout's gonna be,
fantastic.
and it
Yeah,
was a
and I
huge
think
turnout.
it was massive, and I think over 1,000 people. I know on Saturday it was probably pushing 1,000 people total just for the one day. But I think other than Sunday, I think Friday was very similar in an even shorter span that they had like almost 1,000 people come through. I got there an hour after they opened on Friday, and it was a 3-hour wait to get inside the trailer for kits. And I think by the time they closed Friday evening, a third of those kits were sold out that were exclusive,
Yeah,
Gundam Base or whatever. And I think going forward, here's my big takeaway. Fantastic event. The other things that went along with it were great. Hobbytown is a great place to host that sort of thing. And inside they had ample things to go and buy and do and hang out if you wanted to. Uh, I think if I were in charge, this is, and I've told other people this, they had regular release kits, which is understandable, but Hobbytown had the same kits inside. I think that they should have, maybe not done the indoor thing. Maybe had like it's hard to predict weather, but if they had bigger tents or something they could put
yeah,
merchandise in, so they could have more people at a time. And also, like, if Hobbytown is selling a regular release kit in the store, why have it in your exclusive area? Why not just have exclusive kits in the exclusive area and have more of them, so that people
yeah,
have a better chance? Because that's what they're coming there. They're waiting in line for 3 hours to buy an exclusive kit that they can't buy in the store. So why not cater to that? So that's my 2 cents of like a if I had a critique or some feedback for them, it would be, hey, fill that thing with exclusive kits. Don't put stuff
yeah,
in there that's a regular release that you can go in the store or buy online. Like, go ahead
and
and just fill it with
making it
that stuff.
making it clear that the building area and the video game area was open for people to go like, for people like me that didn't that were there for the people, that were there for the crowd, and wasn't necessarily looking to buy a kit, waiting the 3-hour line to go through the trailer just to then get out into the sort of experience area, I think that there should almost be a physical separation so that people can go and wait in the
Yeah,
experience area and spend
that's a
time
good
there
point.
without so,
Yeah,
but
that's
no.
really valid too. I didn't think about that.
But no, that's I mean, great good insights, and I mean, honestly, I'm just glad that we got to show them the sheer volume of people interested in the hobby, um,
Yeah.
here.
It was amazing, like, it was the excitement, the buzz around it, and everybody was just having such a great time despite getting sunburned and having to wait in, like, ridiculous lines. The mood and the spirit was fantastic, like, people were having and I went inside for a good while just to cool off and, like, hang out and meet people, and, man, it was great, like, inside people were they moved a whole lot of kits that weekend inside the store too, like, they were happy, like, Hobbytown was happy, like, and they should be, like, that was a great moment.
Yeah, yeah, it was fantastic. Well put on event, and yeah, definitely shout out to Hobbytown, Richmond for being such spectacular hosts and just like I said in my post on Instagram, like just ambassadors for the hobby. So
Right, right.
sweet. Well, I know you got to get going, so I will let you go, and we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much for coming on, everybody in chat. Thank you for
Right,
hanging
yeah.
out with us. Definitely go follow Hoskin House on Instagram. One of the, I mean, one of the most talented builders here locally and internationally.
Ah,
But
thanks.
yeah, no, I look forward to catching up with you again here soon, in
Yeah, I
person,
can't wait to
and
see you in person again, yeah.
Yeah, and always, welcome to have you here back on stream and, just talk Gunpla, or if we wanted to do a group build, that would be awesome.
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, we're committed to it now, we said it live.
Yeah, yep, definitely,
Well
into it.
well, thank you so much, and, we will catch you all later. Don't forget Gundam Explained podcast tomorrow, same usual time there at, 5 PM Eastern, 4 PM Central. We'll catch you all next time.
Thank you.
Cheers.